I really love Skirk. Like, before she even had a face, I already love the idea that she's partially responsible for the Tartaglia we know and love. She's the one who taught him everything he knows, and for almost 4 years, all of the information that we have of her is from Child's one voice line. But that all changed during the final act of the Fontaine Archon quest because she finally made an appearance and then disappeared for a year. But now she's back, and she's playable. Patch 5.7 is finally here, and my lord, is it a patch. It's a patch that comes along with her story quest, a ton of new lore from the new Archon quest, which is part of the Dainsleif quest called A Space and Time for You, and also a new 4-star character released, which is Dahlia, someone that we've seen in the most recent Albedo interlude quest, and of course the rerun of these beautiful ladies in the second half of the patch. We also have new web events and new rewards, so tons of exciting stuff in the game right now. Lots to talk about and a gift code below to help you on your Skirk pulls, so make sure to check that out. So with that being said, don't forget to check out Skirk right now. She's amazing, and let's talk about her and what makes her one of the most intriguing characters in Genshin. I'm going to go over her story quest and what I think makes her fascinating as a character. I also think the way they set up her story is going to be pretty detrimental to how the twins' storyline is gonna play out in the later parts of the game, like narratively, especially now with the release of the latest Dainsleif quest and how we're getting closer and closer towards the truth of what really happened in Kandria, and also the slow reveal of the 5 sinners. So we will talk about that in this video too, just a bit later on. Now, disclaimer, as usual, everything I say in this video is my opinion, and this is not a super objective professional video essay. It's mostly just me talking about my opinions and whatever I want. Basically, if you're not down with that, please get out of the video right now, because this video is probably not for you, so don't waste your time. Now, Skirk. With her release, we also got access to her story quest, and I personally really like her story quest. I think it's one of the best ones in the game. Recency bias, maybe, but I just like that it's about her. And I also like that it's pretty fast-paced. Like, I don't know what it is, but some Genshin story quests have a really slow start. Like, I'm not saying that makes the story quest automatically bad, but it does make it feel slow before it builds up into a banger by the end. But I feel like Skirk's story quest didn't do that. If anything, it was the opposite. Things start to go wrong for the Traveler as soon as we start the quest, and we bump into Skirk not long after. While being sick, the Traveler keeps dreaming and finding themselves in an abyssal realm with an entity that keeps stabbing them. The Traveler feels the pain in the dream, but once they wake up, they're actually fine. There's no wound or anything, but Paimon does note that the Traveler has seen better days. They're not looking very well. So they go to Boo Boo Pharmacy to investigate the cause of the illness. And while in Liyue, Paimon suggested that they go to Wanmin restaurant to get some food and to make the Traveler feel better. And here is where we bump into Skirk, which is an insane thing to happen if you really think about it. Child has been searching for this woman ever since he escaped the abyss as a child, and he has never seen her once. And well, we do find out why later on in the quest, but for now, Skirk purposely approaches the Traveler during their meal. She orders a glass of wine, and she encourages the Traveler to tell her about their nightmare because she senses that the entity appearing in their dream is stealing parts of their soul, and she also senses traces of abyssal power within them, which is probably why she showed up in the first place. I do think that this encounter is still pretty random though. Like, we've only seen her once very briefly at the end of the Fontaine Archon quest, so having her show up out of nowhere, even with the game trying to justify the reason as to why she would be there, still feels just a little bit off to me. Just a little bit though. This might be a nitpick, but I think for a character like Skirk, who's pretty significant in terms of lore, it would have been better if they'd built her up in events. She's one of those characters that didn't really have a role in the Archon quest other than a cameo, and considering how important she is to the bigger lore and also to another major character, having some build up for her would have made her arrival feel more impactful and less random. It doesn't have to be a full-on event where she's at the center. For example, in patch 2.6, we had the Irodori festival, and that event is about multiple characters, but by the end, it was used to lay the groundwork for Scaramouche, who will be a part of the Sumeru Archon quest just a few months later. And even before that, Scaramouche was mentioned several times in random events. Like in Labyrinth Warriors, Child mentions that he's in Inazuma to look for Scaramouche, who took off with the Electronosis at the end of the Inazuma Archon quest. Scaramouche's presence in the Archon quest was also basically just a cameo, so having multiple events building up to him is actually something that does a lot in terms of just building presence in the overall story. So that's what I feel like makes the encounter between the Traveler and Scaramouche in Sumeru feel a little bit less random. Like, by the time of his appearance in Sumeru, we already have a slight idea on who he is and what his history was. Like, we don't have the full picture, but it was already like there, like the dots already there, and we just connected it by the time we got to the interlude quest. I feel like Hoyo does try to do this with materials outside of the game, like we've gotten clips of Child talking about Skirk with Arlecchino, but I think having something similar in the game would have made it better. It's just my personal nitpick though. Anyway, the Traveler does end up accepting Skirk's offer for help and they agree to meet up in Guili Plains. It's also worth noting that after Skirk left, Chef Mao, who served the wine to Skirk, doesn't remember her. It's almost like his memory's been wiped as soon as she left. This leads to the Traveler joining Skirk after learning that whoever is messing with them has been stealing sources of power from different places. So it's probably not a targeted attack on the Traveler, but this entity is strong, something that's considered to be godlike according to Skirk. So the Traveler and Skirk strikes a deal. She'll help the Traveler in recovering the missing parts of their soul if they help her identify the culprit. For me personally, this is a good way to establish a believable relationship and dynamic between Skirk and the Traveler. It makes sense, right? The Traveler has absolutely no reason to trust Skirk because 1, they've only met her once, and 2, she's someone who's heavily tied to the Abyss, and 3, the only other thing that we know about her is that she's the person responsible for turning Child into this. So setting up the Traveler to really have no other choice but to help Skirk in order to help themselves is actually a really good way of establishing that dynamic. It doesn't really feel forced. Skirk, on the other hand, also seems like someone who's transactional. She's not really one to rely on others, nor does she seem to be someone who's sly and is completely willing to take advantage of people in a vulnerable state. So yeah, I like that setup. They went into the Abyss where Skirk mostly resides, and it's here that they actually have an interesting conversation about the power of the Abyss. See, the Traveler's experience with the Abyss has been absolutely horrible, and you can't blame them for being a little bit guarded. The Abyss is responsible for so many horrid events in Teyvat, including the war that's just occurred in Natlan. So it's pretty understandable that the Traveler has no interest in dabbling with power that comes from the Abyss. But Skirk, she doesn't see it that way. To Skirk, who is someone detached and hasn't really had any scathing experiences related to the Abyss specifically, sees the power that comes from the Abyss as just another source of power. It's the same way that the people in Teyvat considers elemental energy to be a source of power. So to Skirk, deriving power from the Abyss is fair game. And I think this clash of perspective is so important for the Traveler and for any character related to the Abyss that will show up in the future. In order to help the Traveler with their nightmares, she performs dream mirroring, and as an addition, she gives the Traveler a special training regimen to follow while they're in the Abyss. What she doesn't expect though is that the dream mirroring that she performs on the Traveler actually allows the Traveler to see her dreams. It starts out empty and dark until this small entity appears near the Traveler, and after they follow the entity, they end up witnessing various fragments of memories from Skirk's earlier life. Now this part of the quest is where the lore bombs really start to drop. We learn that Skirk is someone who comes from an entirely different planet, and she's shown to be a fairly normal child. She lives with her parents who love her. Her mom is worried about her because she's been skipping school to go exploring, but her dad can't help but to spoil his little girl a little bit. It's just a normal family dynamic that happens to take place on a completely different planet. Little Skirk also talks about her dreams and how she wants to explore the universe, especially ever since merchants from another planet arrived. It's also one of the reasons why she keeps skipping school, and it's to daydream that one day when she grows up, she would be able to explore the universe. But on one fateful day, when she got back home after skipping a day of school, her life changed completely. She came home to the merchants, slaughtering everyone in her village. Keep in mind, these merchants were treated with kindness and the people welcomed them with open arms, only to be stabbed in the back like in the cruelest way possible. The merchants treated her people like they were savages. They actually called them savages. Skirk actually managed to find her parents alive, but they told her to save herself, and this conversation with her father especially is something that adds a lot of emotional layers to her, especially later on. I think there's been a lot of speculation on who these merchants are, but I have no idea in the context of Genshin alone. So I hope that the game will expand on who the merchants are in Genshin, but it probably won't happen until we're done with Kandria. But the arrival of Skirk just genuinely expanded Genshin's world, and it might even subtly nod to Hoyo's other games, which is always fun for the fans. Another thing that the Traveler discovers through Skirk is how Surtaluji absolutely lives up to his name. After Skirk lost her family, Surtaluji essentially took her in as one of his disciples. He said he doesn't really have any real reason for this other than he saw potential in Skirk. Surtaluji basically taught Skirk everything she knew, which includes the Black Serpent blade work of Kandria, and also how to wield the power of the Abyss. He's also the one who pushed Skirk to her limit and quite literally breaks her so that she would get stronger. Surtalogi's methods is what made Skirk so emotionless. So she's not just emotionless to be edgy. She's emotionless because she was taught by Surtalogy that suppression of emotions, which is mainly grief for her at that point, was the only way that she could survive and get stronger. We learn a lot about Surtalogy through Skirk's point of view. We learn that she's traveled across the universe with him for some time in search of an opponent that's stronger than him, but to no avail. He lets Skirk go off on her own when he feels like he's taught her everything he knows. This guy specifically told her to rebuild her life, only to say that he will one day return and take the life she's built for herself and destroy it to ashes. Absolutely lives up to his name. He's absolutely foul. He believes that fear is the catalyst for human evolution, so he's not actually saying that to be an ass to Skirk. He's just genuinely implementing what he thinks will make her stronger, even though it's foul. He also hopes that Skirk would one day surpass him and would be the worthy opponent that he's been desperately seeking for. Other than memories of Surtalogy, the Traveler also witnessed the moment Skirk arrived in Teyvat with Alice's help, which Skirk also later clarifies that she's different from the Descenders. She's from another world similar to the Descenders, but she's mostly just passing by. She's a trespasser. You also just get to see little mundane things about her, which I guess humanizes her. She cooks for the Traveler and Paimon. She also sings a melody that reminds her of her parents, her dad especially. It shows that even after all she went through and after all of Surtalogy's influence on her, she's still unable to fully detach, or at least detach to the point where she's lost all of her humanity. She suppresses, but the grief and longing are still there. It bleeds out in quieter moments in her life. And with everything that's revealed about Surtalogy, we also learn why Skirk is in Teyvat, and that's because her main goal is to defeat her master. And what better way to figure out the source of his strength than to go to his home planet to investigate. The Traveler also asks about Tartaglia, and Skirk admits that she's hiding from him, saying that she wants Tartaglia to carve his own path rather than just following her, and also that she would only meet him again if he can finally stand up to her in terms of strength. The Traveler doesn't completely buy this though. Like, they know Skirk isn't lying per se, but they can sense that there's something else beneath the surface, which is true. In the confrontation with the mysterious entity, Skirk figures out why it was targeting the Traveler, and it was because of their purifying ability. And she was also able to pinpoint that whoever this entity is, they're related to Surtalogy. In the confrontation, Skirk gets injured and the Traveler takes her back to Bubu Pharmacy to recover her strength. Now we've reached the most important part of Skirk's story quest, and I think it's also what her character is really about, at least at this point in the story. While Skirk was meditating to recover her strength, the Traveler was approached by the small entity that they met in the fragments of Skirk's memories, and it took us inside Skirk's inner world. And the entity in question obviously represents Skirk's emotions. As the Traveler goes through Skirk's inner world, they begin to understand Skirk's story and motivations better. They also get a confirmation that Skirk does suppress her emotions to an extreme degree due to Surtalogy's teachings and influence. And at this point, it's also just another part of Skirk's survival mechanisms. It's how she copes, and it's very isolating and unhealthy. Emotional suppression and the damage that it can do to a person is one of the main themes of her story quest here. Skirk isn't emotionless to begin with. She's not edgy and she's not cold because she wants to be. She's just someone who's never had the opportunity to process any of her emotions since she was a child. She wasn't even allowed to think about her parents and the most devastating moment in her life, which is the destruction of her village and the death of her parents, because Surtalogy taught her that it was a waste of time and it made her weak. And afterwards, she carries this notion with her. She doesn't like to dwell on things and is mostly pragmatic and transactional. And most importantly, she steers away from human connection. Now we've seen similar themes in other characters. There's quite a few actually. Xiao is, I think, someone who's also in a way suppresses his emotions and steer clears of human connection. But it is a bit different because Xiao's main motivation is duty, and while he does suppress some of his emotions, he still grieves a lot. He is still allowed to remember his fallen comrades, and most of the time he's also just in agony because of his karmic debt. And another form of emotional suppression that we've seen is from Furina. This one is also different because unlike Xiao and Skirk, Furina isn't isolated. If anything, she's celebrated, but she's still one of the loneliest characters that we've met too. She does neglect her own needs and tries to suppress her own emotions in order to perform as the Hydro Archon. She's someone who's suppressing, and from the outside, she's also someone who seems like she has everything. And it's just a different way of portraying emotional suppression and isolation. Skirk's portrayal is closer to what we would expect when we talk about emotional suppression because it is is linked to survival, and I think that's also what can give Skirk that small relatability to the players. In concept, she's not supposed to be relatable, but her coping mechanisms is something that we actually can see a lot even in real life. She doesn't know how to let people in. To her, her own emotional needs come second. She can't afford to grieve or to remember her homeland because it's a waste of time, and she can't afford to waste time because she needs time to find ways to defeat her master. She's stuck in a structure that's forced upon her by Surtalogy and is only now starting to break out of it thanks to the Traveler. The Traveler can sense that Skirk's decision to not see Child again isn't entirely because of pragmatic reasons, like she wants him to forge his own path. The Traveler knows that it's only part of the truth, not the whole truth though. They know one of the reasons Skirk might not want to reach out to probably one of the only people that she knows and cares about in Teyvat is because she feels like she can't afford to make a real connection. Because making a real connection is equal to her rebuilding her life. It's the first step in allowing Surtalogy to take everything away from her again. And it's not just Child, you can see it even in really trivial interactions like with Chef Mao at the beginning of her story quest. She erases herself from people's memories because she probably feels like she can't afford to exist in any real way. That's why she thinks of herself as a trespasser. She doesn't belong anywhere, especially in Teyvat, and this is self-imposed isolation in her case. It's done out of fear, which is exactly what Surtalogy taught her. Even with her resolve to defeat him, his influences and his teachings is still deeply ingrained into her and how she lives her life, which is understandable. She's never really had any reason to break free from those chains. I think to Skirk, the only real way to meet her end goal, which is a world that's more forgiving and full of peace, she needs to be stronger than Surtalogy. And living her life in fear does help her get stronger, at least in her mind, until it doesn't. And I feel like the Traveler's presence in the story quest helped her realize that acknowledging her suppressed emotion would make her weak, and that maybe fear isn't the catalyst of human evolution that Surtalogy makes it out to be. Maybe power can come from something more kind and human. And this realization of hers is presented in the scene where the ice around her begins to crack. This isn't an emotionless ice princess finally warming up to someone. I think it's just a lot deeper than that because it's someone breaking free from a prison that was forced upon them masked as survival. It's someone taking their first steps in discovering that there is a life outside of the structure that they thought was necessary for survival, and at this point a part of their identity. It's a much more realistic and deeper story than just an ice queen melting. Anyway, I do think that Skirk's journey with coming to terms with her grief is only just starting. Acknowledging her grief and actually giving it space is after all the first step that anyone should take when they are trying to move forward. What I also find really interesting about Skirk is that she has somehow managed to break the chain of passing down her long list of trauma onto Tartaglia. When they met, Tartaglia was like, what, 14? He was a child. He accidentally fell into one of the most dangerous parts of the world, and Skirk, being the only person that's there, spent time teaching him how to survive. She didn't have to. If she's really as detached, emotionless, and transactional as she seems to be, she wouldn't take this random child under her wing. There's absolutely nothing in it for her other than to just help him survive. We also learn through little anecdotes that Skirk cooks for him even though he finds the taste weird, and you can tell Child appreciates her even though she wasn't the warmest person to be around. You know that saying that goes, hurt people hurt people? Skirk is someone who's been hurt by the loss of everything she's ever known, and then by the only other person in her life, which is Surtalogy. But she doesn't pass this down to Child. When she took Child under her wing, she didn't treat him the same way Surtalogy treated her. She wasn't a ray of sunshine to him, but she definitely had more compassion towards him. You can tell by her saying that instead of worrying of how many hands she'll use in a fight, she's more worried about how many he will have by the end of it. Compare this to Surtalogy, who purposely trained her to the point that she broke her arms and probably other limbs. He took that as a sign of strength and endurance. To Surtalogy, limbs can after all like go back to the way it used to be, I guess, and it's good that she's becoming numb to the pain because of how often it was breaking. But Skirk, despite going through all that, doesn't apply any of that to Tartaglia. While she does train him, and I can imagine that she's harsh and strict with him, but she definitely wasn't cruel. She actually broke the chains of generational trauma, and she's a queen for that. Tartaglia, even years later, still has nothing but good things to say about her, and it's also why he's still looking for her. He admires her for her strength, sure, but he also said that he wanted her to go back with him to Snezhnaya so that she could taste homemade sausages or something that his family makes. He actually said that they agreed to do so, which implies either Skirk played along to Tartaglia's nonsense or he actually just wore her down into saying yes. She also probably trained Child similar similar to how she trained the Traveler in her story quest, which is a segment that I'm a big fan of. I love that we had that training regimen with her because it does show the contrast in how she trains her disciples versus how she herself was trained by Surtalogy. It shows that despite her cold and distant demeanor, she's not someone who's out to harm others or enjoys inflicting pain. And this is important because I personally think that it will help to shift the Traveler's perspective on the Abyss a little bit more. Now, the Traveler is probably the only other person that's friendly with Skirk other than Child and Alice, at least that we know of right now. Their role in her story is important and is pretty fitting as a catalyst. They just helped her to reach the conclusion that we've talked about earlier, and how emotional suppression is probably not the best idea or coping mechanism. But the Traveler's perspective on the Abyss and abyssal power is also challenged here. For the past 5 years and the entirety of the game, there's been very little redeeming quality when it comes to the Abyss. The group that's linked to the Abyss is the Abyss Order, and also the tragedy that befell on Khaenri'ah was caused by the Abyss. The Natlan War was also caused by the Abyss, and so yeah, it's all bad. Everything that the Abyss touches is basically destroyed, and it's always been this destructive force. And the people who dabbled with the Abyss have been destructive, like the Five Sinners and then the Abyss Twin. Like, I'm not saying they're evil right now because we don't really know the full story yet, but they are using abyssal power to do shady things, and people are being harmed by that power regardless of the intention. So when the Traveler was offered by Skirk to learn stuff about the Abyss and maybe wielding abyssal power, they refused, which is understandable. But it's also why Skirk's presence and new form of friendship with the Traveler is so important. She's one of the only characters that we've seen so far that wields abyssal power yet isn't completely destructive, or at least like her self-serving motivations isn't causing destruction towards other people. In fact, she lives in a way that she might as well not even exist in Teyvat. So in a way, she is someone who challenges the Traveler's worldview when it comes to the Abyss, and this can be a big foundation for what's to come in future arcs. And I think it's also important that Skirk doesn't go out of character just because she trusts the Traveler a bit more now. This is absolutely crucial to make Skirk feel believable as a character. Her story is about someone who's steered clear of human connection out of fear. She's lived in isolation for most of her life, so having her a bit too buddy-buddy or warm with the Traveler just because they're the Traveler would be a disservice to her story. It's also what I think makes some gacha characters feel a bit performative, like a product for players to buy than they are a character in a story. And if they feel more like a product, then it's usually where the character starts to feel a bit shallow for me. But that's definitely not the case here because, like I said, Skirk was very curt and polite and didn't really act in ways that's out of character. The game even made sure to show that she acknowledges that their initial interaction is transactional to her. Her dynamic with the Traveler and them gaining her trust is believable in a way that I think the Wanderer's trust for the Traveler slowly develops after the Archon quest is also believable. So when they cross paths again in the future, there's some potential for even better and believable character dynamics between the two because the foundation is already set. The Traveler is someone who's helped her in cracking the initial ice of suppression, and that's always going to matter the same way how we often have that one friend who was the catalyst of our growth. Not necessarily the reason, but they did help kickstart that journey, and Skirk is currently on that journey. I think what I like most about her story quest is that it really gave us a reason to care about her and her story. Skirk's concept as a character was always going to sell. She's always been one of the most enigmatic characters just by concept alone, but up until her story quest, there's never really been a reason for me as a player to connect with her, but this story quest was definitely successful in doing that. Other than that, I think what makes this such a good story quest, other than it fully being about Skirk, it also laid out the groundwork for one of the most mysterious characters in the game, and that is Surtalogy. As mentioned, Surtalogy is one of the most important figures in Skirk's life, and her story quest managed to establish him pretty well. I think they revealed just enough for him to be mysterious and menacing, but also with a little bit of nuance. I think the Five Sinners of Khaenri'ah are slowly being set up to be villains with nuance. Like, they are probably not good people, but just seeing how Surtalogy's cruelty comes from his desire for strength as opposed to full-on destruction and intent for harm already adds nuance to him. Don't get me wrong, he's still doing evil things, but there's nuance and complexity in it, which makes the character layered and more interesting, to me at least. I really like these kinds of characters personally. Like, Skirk's initial story quest is so focused on laying down foundations on who she is and the lore that she brings that will probably matter a lot later on. It's a similar approach to what they've done with Arlecchino and her story quest. And with the recent release of the 5.7 Archon quest, we're finally able to revisit the story of the Traveler and their siblings. As some of you might already know, the goal of the Abyss Twin is to revive the homeland of Khaenri'ah. So for this quest, we only know bits and pieces of what happened, like how they were crowned as prince or princess of Khaenri'ah and how they woke up much earlier than the Traveler. But we've never had a full understanding on why the Abyss Twin was so determined in saving Khaenri'ah. But I think thanks to the newest quest, we finally have a clearer picture on what really happened and what might motivate the Abyss Twin. We learned that the Abyss Twin was regarded as the savior by the people of Khaenri'ah and was basically, in my opinion, put on a pedestal a little bit. We find out from Dirdith, who's on the run to be Genshin's most tragic NPC, that the Abyss Twin is supposed to be the savior of Khaenri'ah during the Cataclysm, which is kinda messed up because we also know from lore pieces that King Ermin actually used the Traveler's twin as a vessel for unlimited abyssal power, which is also probably what triggered the Cataclysm in the first place. But as the Abyss sibling was about to go into battle to save Khaenri'ah from destruction, they hesitated when Dirdith found them and told them about the Traveler, and this encounter ended with the Abyss sibling choosing to find the Traveler instead of fighting for Khaenri'ah to the very end. The twin states that they want to rebuild Khaenri'ah because they consider it to be their second home, and this is something we've always kinda known, but this new information about how they actually chose to step away during the Cataclysm's most pivotal moment is a big part of what's driving their actions. Like, the twin casually name drops Istaroth in the new quest, and considering how the set of events that happened at the beginning of the game, like literally the very first scene, is caused by a time loop that's revealed in this quest, it opens up a lot of doors on what really happened and it muddies the water a little bit. We now know that King Ermin is the one who rocked the foundation of Teyvat by using the twin as a vessel for abyssal power, but according to Dainsleif, the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah could have actually stopped him, but they didn't, because they too couldn't resist the temptation of the abyss. From Skirk's story quest, we can see how Surtalogi's motives are self-serving, and he doesn't seem to be too concerned with Khaenri'ah, but he's also not someone who seems to be completely hostile, just judging by his interactions with his disciples. What we know for sure is that the people of Khaenri'ah never stood a chance. Their own king caused the Cataclysm, the 5 greatest individuals in their nation had more self-serving interests and failed to show up to defend their own homeland during the Cataclysm, and the only other person that did care about Khaenri'ah, which is the twin, also made a choice that was more important to them. Everyone that could have made a difference chose something else entirely, and the Abyss Twin seems to be the only one that's trying to correct the course of what happened 500 years ago, even though you could say that they're the last one that should be blamed on what really happened back then. So there you go. Skirk's introduction to me actually came with the foundation of how nuanced and complex the Khaenri'ah/Abyss storyline is going to be. I feel like the 5 sinners, the Abyss Twin, Istaroth, and probably everyone involved in the Cataclysm will have their own conflicting motivations, even if none of them really had bad intentions toward the people. But even without bad intentions, they still failed the people of Khaenri'ah, and innocent people like Dirdith, Caribert, and so many others had to pay the price. What do you guys think of Skirk and the new Archon quest? I personally got Skirk, but I have yet to successfully obtain her weapon, so fingers crossed luck will be on my side before her banner ends. I hope you guys are enjoying the current patch and are having fun playing Genshin. Subscribe if you made it this far and want to hear more of my incessant yapping, or not, that's up to you guys, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!